Welcome, everyone, to the Friday, October 18th, 2024 episode of On Iowa Politics. This week, half of Iowa's congressional campaigns are now toss-ups, Ashley Hinson and Sarah Corkery debate, and a donor's ties to Mariannette Miller-Meeks Davenport home. Hello, everyone. I'm Erin.murphy, the Des Moines Bureau Chief for the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. With me this week, our Gazette Deputy Bureau Chief, Tom Barton, he of the undefeated Cyclone football fandom. Hello, Tom.
Hell yeah. Hello, Erin.
Sarah Watson of the Quad City Times is with us. Hello, Sarah.
Erin, I think we just need to stop this for a moment. Let's listen to my playlist, okay?
I'll dance. I'll look a lot like Trump when I dance.
I'm all for that, but I don't know if we have a half hour to 40 minutes to do that, Sarah. So we may have to push ahead. But thank you for the suggestion. What's on your playlist?
I hadn't gotten that far.
Okay. And finally, Gazette columnist Todd Dorman is with us. Hello, Todd.
Hello.
All right, folks, however you define the term stretch run, when it comes to the 2024 elections, we are in it. As of our recording on Thursday afternoon, we are now 19 days from the November 5th elections. Not that anybody is counting. And in Iowa, ballots are already being cast. Early voting started Wednesday this week. Some of those votes are being cast in two of the most competitive U.S. House elections in the entire U.S. of A. Multiple national forecasters have in this past week or so shifted Eastern Iowa's 1st District and Central Iowa's 3rd District to toss-up status for the first time this cycle. Up until that shift, the forecasters rated those campaigns as leaning toward the Republican incumbents, Mariannette Miller-Meeks in the 1st and Zach Nunn in the 3rd. That means those forecasters think that those campaigns are essentially a coin toss right now between those Republicans and their Democratic challengers, Christina Bohannon in the 1st and Lenon Beckham in the 3rd. Sarah, let's start with you. You're on the ground in the heart of the 1st District. What's your sense of where things stand in that campaign, and what are you seeing from the candidates as we enter these final few weeks before the election?
Yeah, so we're seeing quite a bit of Christina Bohannon and Mariannette Miller-Meeks. They're campaigning pretty aggressive on the airwaves as well. See a lot of ads, especially in the 1st District, just considering how broken up the media market is. So I'm sure there are a lot of people who are not in the 1st District and familiar with some of those advertisements. So we've seen, and I think both candidates acknowledge that the race is really close. Christina Bohannon, in an interview with us, she said that she really felt like being an general election year, the energy was different. There were a lot more people paying attention. She was able to gain some name recognition from her 2022 run. And so feels like there's a lot more energy around this 2024 run, especially since Kamala Harris stepped into the race. And Mariannette Miller-Meeks likewise acknowledges that this is a really tight election. And she thinks that she told us that she thinks that the forecasters changing the race to being more tight, more narrow, lines up more with what her perception of the district was. And so she also has said that she believes that Democrats are running, especially Christina Bohannon, are running on some Republican ideas, such as Christina Bohannon visited a gun range a few weeks ago, and is running an ad with a couple of different sheriffs saying that she's pro law enforcement, saying to tamp down on high prices. And
immigration.
Yeah, and
I don't know if that's
immigration.
been into the ads, but I know she's talked about immigration.
She's definitely talked about that. Yeah, both candidates are talking about high prices, and Mariannette Miller-Meeks talking about immigration, though both have different ideas about how best to address it. Mariannette Miller-Meeks is really pushing for more domestic energy production and less spending by the federal government. Christina Bohannon is really talking about price gouging quite a bit on her stops and how holding corporations accountable for some of these high prices and consolidation of industries in the food industry. So both are talking about high prices, both have different ideas about how to bring those down, or at least cool inflation. And we've seen a couple times they cross paths, at least here in Scott County. So this past weekend, they both had several events. Christina Bohannon was campaigning with Bettendorf with some Scott County educators. That's also a big part of her campaign, is talking about education. And Mariannette Miller-Meeks was in Walcott, rallying with a couple of members of Congress. And she had also been here a week or so earlier. She'd gotten an endorsement from the U.S. Chamber. And then she had a pro law enforcement rally in near Muscatine. So in Wilton, excuse me. And so, and then funny enough, on Wednesday, Christina Bohannon was having a rally for early voters in just near the Scott Administrative Building, which is where early voting started that morning. And I saw later that the Iowa GOP sent out a press release that Mariannette Miller-Meeks had cast her vote that morning early at the Scott Administrative Center. So may have crossed paths because they were really close by each other. So we're definitely seeing quite a bit of aggressive campaigning and ads on the airwaves from those two candidates. So definitely an indication that this race is competitive, and both candidates think that it'll be competitive. And I want to add too that in the first district, Republicans do have a voter registration advantage, but Democrats are hoping that with it being a general election year, they could turn out more of their Democrats.
Yeah. And to all that campaigning, on Friday, House Speaker Johnson is going to be in Iowa doing events with both of these two candidates we're talking about here, Mariannette Miller-Meeks later Friday in Indianola, and with Zach Nunn earlier Friday in the Des Moines area. So the national help coming into these competitive races as well. We heard that maybe some national Democrats might be around to help out the Democrats here in Iowa as well, but haven't been able to confirm that as of 3:13 on Thursday afternoon. So we'll see if that turns out to be something or not. But anyways, obviously for all the metrics and that Sarah listed, I absolutely agree. Obviously the campaigns believe this is a close one, and the national groups and political organizations think this is a close one. So it's obviously going to be one to monitor. Todd, I'll throw you to the wolves here. I didn't include this in our pre-gaming notes. What's your sense of the third district with Lennon Bacam and Zach Nunn? That again, all indications are that's a competitive one. I hear the chatter is that the first district is maybe a little more likely to flip than the third. What are you hearing?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm hearing, is that Bohannon may have a better chance to grab a seat than Bacam. But I mean, it's still razor close, and of course in that district, it all depends on what the turnout is in Polk County, because that's
Yep.
where all the Democrats are. Well, not all of them, but most of them. So,
And that's what
yeah,
happened. That's why there's a Congressman Zach Nunn now and not a third term Cindy Axney, because Polk County turnout was
yeah,
significantly
yeah.
down in 2022.
Exactly. So it's the campaign. I have a sense that the campaign's been getting uh, a little more, what do you say, spirited in the last several weeks. It was a little bit, it was more about each of them kind of laying out their proposals and things. But now the attack ads are saturating the central Iowa TV market, uh, and they had a debate, which apparently was not what's the word I'm looking for? Not friendly, maybe
Cordial. Yeah.
cordial.
Yeah.
So yeah, uh,
It's
but
heating up.
and you're seeing signs in the early voting that, and this is just completely anecdotal, but in Polk County yesterday, the lines to get in to vote early were massive. I don't know what that means. It was a nice day, I guess, but uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting when you kind of piecing together those little stories that may or may not be significant.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that there were similar scenes all over the state. I know there was some including in Cedar Rapids. So yeah, we don't know. I mean, typically, historically, broadly speaking, higher turnout tends to favor Democrats, but we don't know. It could be the interest is really spiking early on both sides right now, and then that sort of canceling each other out. With obviously, we'll see as
Well,
time goes on here.
Republicans want to vote for Trump quick before he just goes off the deep end completely. So maybe that's maybe that explains it.
Before the second playlist starts.
He, yeah, before before he's on Dancing with the Stars.
Oh, God help us. All right. Eastern Iowa's second congressional district is not considered a toss up. Republican incumbent Ashley Hinson is favored to fend off a challenge there from Democrat Sarah Corkery. We want to talk about that campaign this week because, for one thing, Hinson Corkery debated Monday night on Iowa PBS. It is the only time Hinson Corkery are scheduled to debate this cycle. The moderator panel included a couple of outstanding Iowa journalists and then this doofus. Tom, you wrote about the debate. What were some of the highlights? Shady moderating aside, what were some of the highlights or noteworthy moments as you saw them?
Yeah, there were a few. I guess the biggest thing that stood out to me is that Ashley Hinson seems kind of unbothered by the attacks and interruptions by her Democratic challenger, Sarah Corkery of Cedar Falls, kind of treating them more of an annoyance than something at which to kind of bristle and return fire. The Republican incumbent remained poised and focused on her record of working to expand access to maternal care for women in rural areas, expand the child tax credit for working families, provide additional resources for expecting mothers, and support young families. The kind of attack lines in the debate, were what we expected and what we have been hearing on the campaign trail from these two candidates. Sarah Corkery, two-time breast cancer survivor and a Cedar Falls Democrat, has really focused her campaign on women's health care rights, abortion access, and public education, and attacked Hinson for supporting legislation limiting women's ability to receive an abortion, and voting against measures that would protect access to fertility treatments and various forms of birth control. Hinson noted her efforts through an appropriations process to expand IVF services available to government employees, as well as her efforts to expand access to over-the-counter oral contraceptives for adults. But I guess some of the more memorable exchanges from the debate, had to do with their stance on abortion and IVF. Again, Sarah Corkery hitting Ashley Hinson for supporting or co-sponsoring legislation, the Life at Conception Act, that would establish legal protections for fetuses and embryos at the moment of fertilization, while the bill, which never made it to the House floor, doesn't specifically mention abortion. Critics say that, it would undoubtedly restrict the medical procedure as well as in vitro fertilization. The bill does not spell out protections for fertility treatments or exceptions for cases involving rape, incest, or to save the life of the mother. What was, I guess, notable about that exchange is, Hinson was pressed on that by a moderator, saying that, you often say that, you support these exceptions for, rape, incest, life of the mother. However, this piece of legislation that you co-sponsored doesn't have those exceptions in it. Why should Iowans and voters, essentially trust you on this issue? And I think it was notable that Hinson said that she would not vote for that bill as it's currently written. So she co-sponsored it, but said that she wouldn't vote for it on the House floor because it does not contain those exceptions, and said that she would not support. What was her direct quote?
Well, what I
Saying that
remember,
no piece of no piece of legislation would get her support without
yeah,
those exceptions.
and that was I'm glad you pointed out because that was a fascinating moment to me too. And look, know whether this is a move the needle kind of answer anyways. And as we talk about this topic broadly, obviously you're talking about an issue that uh, there's not a lot of unresolved stances out there among the electorate. But I just thought it was interesting because it was one of those answers that was essentially like Hinson said, I co-sponsored the the one bill as a show of my belief in the life issue, using her words, but then I wouldn't vote for it as a bill because it didn't contain those exceptions. And to I think it would be fair to observe that that's kind of trying to have the cake and eat it too kind of thing, trying to have it both ways on the issue. Whether that sways voters in any meaningful way, I have my doubts, but I did think that that was kind of an interesting exchange and revelation there, Tom. I agree.
Yeah. And then immigration, securing the southern border was also kind of a big focus of the debate. It's one of Hinson's main priorities. She, like many other Republicans running this cycle, including, Zach Nunn and Mariannette Miller-Meeks, have often use this issue to attack the Biden administration and to attack Vice President Kamala Harris and Democrats for in their minds supporting an open border and talking about the need to make border security a priority. Hinson talked about that she supports efforts to deport dangerous, illegal, undocumented immigrants in this country, and again, work with the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement before focusing on reforming immigration and visa systems. Corkery took that opportunity to argue that Hinson should have supported a bipartisan deal to secure the border that got torpedoed in the Senate by Donald Trump and his supporters, not wanting to, hand Biden and Democrats a win ahead of the election, and noted that that deal would have added more Border Patrol agents and would have done some other things, including restricting the asylum process. Corkery, said that she does support, I guess, a proposal by Vice President Harris, that would give the president, I guess, more authority or latitude to, excuse me, to close the border, and said that she supports making it more difficult to gain asylum in the United States.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting, and back to the top of your thoughts there, the way that especially sitting there on the set, it was in, you don't know how it looks to others, but it was interesting the way, and that's not uncommon, right? In it for the underdog to be on the attack in a debate setting, and Sarah
Right.
Corkery clearly was that. And you're right, I couldn't think of a moment where that rattled Ashley Hinson in any meaningful way. Like I said, it certainly didn't seem like it's sitting there. So
Yeah.
um
Well, I mean, as we mentioned at the top of the podcast, this race is not expected, or excuse me, is expected to be less competitive
yeah,
than these other congressional seats in the state, like the first and third district. The Des Moines Register Mediacom Iowa poll in September showed that more likely Iowa voters preferred a Republican candidate over a Democrat in this district. You have election handicappers like the Cook Political Report
right.
rating the second district as solid Republican, an R+4 district, meaning that in the 2016 and 2022, or excuse me, the 2016 and 2020 presidential election, voters in the district supported Republican candidates on an average of about 4 points more than the nation did as a whole. And unlike the 2022 cycle, Ashley Hinson is, facing vastly underfunded first-time
Yeah.
candidates who are
Yeah.
trying to run grassroots campaigns. Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you
Yeah.
could definitely tell that, this is not necessarily a competitive race that she's, I guess, maybe overly concerned about.
Right. Yep. And the fact that National Democrats are investing in the first and third, but not
Right.
the second, kind of tells you all. Not that the DCCC's judgment is infallible, but at the very least, it shows that they don't see it as a pickup opportunity either. All right. Finally, this week we're going to circle back to the first district and Republican incumbent Mariannette Miller-Meeks. Loyal podcast listeners, and forgive me for the long wind up here. This is a story that requires some backstory. Loyal podcast listeners and close followers of Iowa politics, just generally, will remember that Miller-Meeks' Ottumwa home was drawn into the third district with 2021's redistricting. So she picked up a secondary residence to be in the new first district, so she didn't have to run against Zach Nunn in a primary. For a time, Miller-Meeks was claiming residence with Republican Iowa State Senator Chris Cornoyer in LeClaire. I remember that, right? In LeClaire, yep. More recently, she has claimed residence in and voted from an apartment complex in Davenport. This week, our very own Tom Barton reported that said apartment complex Miller-Meeks is renting is partially owned by a prominent campaign donor, David Barker, who also is a member of the Iowa Board of Regents, the governing body for the state's 3 public universities. As Tom's story notes, Barker has contributed nearly $53,000 to Miller-Meeks since 2020, according to federal campaign finance records. Also in Tom's story are a couple of nuggets that the social media brigade missed, presumably because they saw only the tweet and didn't read the story. Not that I'm bitter. Barker told Tom that he is not involved in the day-to-day operations of the apartments and that he was unaware Miller-Meeks was renting there. And the property manager said that Miller-Meeks pays the market rate for the unit and has paid the rent in full in every month. I saw so many replies to that tweet that said, well, if she's not paying market rate, that's campaign finance. Click on the story, folks. All right. Now that I got that out of my system. So, Todd, if we take those statements at face value, by the way, that's not public information and thus not something easily independently verified. But if we believe those to be true, then Miller-Meeks is not running afoul of any campaign finance laws here. So is this how big a deal is this? Is it critical? Is it as one of our friendly social media warriors memed it, a big nothing burger?
Yeah, it's there have been, this kind of stuff pops up there, and then there's an investigation, and election passes, and then, gee, we never found out how that investigation turned out. What's the deal? I wonder what happened. It's it's not a legal thing; it's a perception thing.
Yeah.
The Bohannon campaign wants to make sure folks in the district know that, or believe that Miller-Meeks doesn't live in the district. So does it have any effect? I suppose, maybe there's a couple of voters who are like, hey, she doesn't live in the district. I'm not going to vote for her. That might be too high an estimate. It's, I don't think it's going to make any difference. This is kind of the thing I rank up there with, like, stealing campaign signs, not having the right paid for on your literature, all of those things that ethics complaints are filed about, or the police will say, we're going to investigate the sign thefts. Yeah, you're going to spend your time investigating what happened to these pieces of cardboard with wire. We must find them. They're very valuable. But yeah, this is just the kind of back and forth stuff that campaigns get into when they've done everything else they can do. And now they're just looking for new ways to sell their candidate and tar the other
Hmm.
candidate. This happened in Marion. a group of people tried to prove that the mayor didn't live in Marion. They had a house
Mhm.
in Hiawatha or Robbins or somewhere, and they even hired a private investigator to follow him around to see where he was going to sleep. So yeah, that didn't amount to anything. The law really didn't seem to care where he lived as long as he had an address in the city where he voted from.
Right.
How much he slept there, the law didn't consider. So that's what this is. It's just, it's trying to tar Miller Meeks as a, I don't know, a carpetbagger from Ottumwa. Can you even be a carpetbagger from that close? But yeah, I don't expect anything to come out of it from an ethics standpoint.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it right off the top. Like there's again, assuming that it's accurate that she is paying market rate, there's not a violation of any kind here. I think there's definitely a perception issue of a candidate. And it's a compounding thing, right? It's we already have her with this whole moving within from within the district thing, and now this and renting from a donor, even if indirectly, is kind of an optics thing. I'm with you. I don't think it moves the needle as far as the election goes, but probably a thing that needs to
Well,
be on the record at the very least, and then it's up to Iowans and
and
voters whether they care.
and Barker he's just a big help, She gets an apartment, he flies the governor around when she needs a plane quickly. I mean, it's the guy's just ready to help. He's a humanitarian. And so I think we should all wish that the world were full of more David Barkers.
I
Yeah,
will say Barker owns quite a few apartment buildings in Davenport. Like there are quite a few like early career folks, even some folks at the Quad City Times that rent from a Barker apartment property. So there are quite a few of those owned by Barker apartments here in Davenport.
so I agree. I think it's more of a perception issue, right? In that the fact that you have this ethics complaint that's been filed against her, alleging that public documents show that her primary residence is in Ottumwa and, not this Davenport apartment that she lists on her um, voter registration. The fact that it's linked to a campaign donor, again, it's a perception issue. It raises some questions. We felt that it was important to, get that on the record. Yeah, I think again, the bigger issue, the bigger question here is, answering a lot of the questions that have been raised in that ethics complaint filed with uh, um, now I'm blanking on the name of the federal office,
Yeah,
the House. But anyway,
the ethics committee, especially, I can't remember the exact name either.
right.
Yeah. Office of
But
Ethics or something like that.
Right. But answering the questions that are raised in that complaint as to, did she potentially violate state law
Right.
by voting in Scott County as opposed to Wapello County, where Ottumwa is, where she and her husband, have their house? Is the Davenport apartment, is that considered, a legal residence,
Right.
where she can vote under the state law, and what are the distinctions, I guess, that the state law makes for people who, maintain two different residences, and how do you determine, what is considered somebody's primary residence, and how do you determine whether that's the Davenport apartment as opposed to the Ottumwa home?
Yeah, and that I agree. I was just about to say, like, if you want to talk about something that could actually be legally tangible, that's the more likely issue there, that of whether she cast a vote at the appropriate precinct. And this is a summary too for we've talked about in the past because of that ethics complaint. Who knows what may come of that, but we do have some recent precedent in Iowa that showed it's a pretty low bar to clear there. And the specific and very recent example is the Jack Whitford thing when he moved from Ankeny and claimed a residence in Grimes, and all it took was a couple of utility bills that showed a little bit of water usage, something to that effect, and that was enough to satisfy the and I can't remember if that was in the courts or if that was a state local
It wasn't
panel.
it wasn't in the courts. It was a
Polk
essentially a
County
voter registration challenge made
Yeah.
to the Polk County auditor, and I
Yeah,
believe
thank you.
and I believe it was the Polk County auditor that that ruled on that challenge or
Yeah.
made a determination that
Yeah, and so that has established a fairly low bar for that. So but this is also now, as we said, that happened here in Iowa. This complaint is with the House Ethics, Congressional Ethics Office. Who knows what'll come of that, if anything? Obviously, we're keeping an eye on it. But again, I agree that's the more, to whatever degree it is likely at all, that's the more likely of the two to produce some actual kind of violation. Obviously something to watch. And the election itself, man, we've got what, if I pull up my calendar, guys, we have 2 podcasts left before the election. And the one after that, we'll be doing our election wrap-up podcast. Pretty crazy. Stay tuned for those. That's it for this episode of On Iowa Politics. If you're not already, please subscribe to us on your stream service of choice or on YouTube, where you should also smash that like button. You also can find the podcast each week on your preferred Gazette or Lee newspaper website. Now that you've listened to the On Iowa Politics podcast, make sure you're also subscribed to the On Iowa Politics newsletter, where every morning in your inbox you'll receive the latest politics and government coverage from our team. You can subscribe to that free newsletter at the Gazette's website, thegazette.com. And lastly, don't forget that the work of everyone you heard here today can be found on the pages and websites of the Quad City Times, Muscatine Journal, Cedar Rapids Gazette, Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, Mason City Globe Gazette, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and the Sioux City Journal. I hope the pacing on that was okay, by the way. It was weird not being able to do it with Jared bopping his head back and forth. For Tom Barton, Sarah Watson, Todd Dorman, our producer Bailey Cichon, I'm Erin Murphy. Be well, everyone, and be good.